Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video 179, Complexity and Difficulty in Some Occult Systems. Now you don't have to cover them all, but a few examples stand out among all of the others. In the form of, it's essentially similar to high versus low magic, after a fashion. Not always though. Low magic means more materialistic in nature, maybe more pragmatic, the folky side of it, which I actually prefer. Insofar as academic study goes, it tends to be more weird. Versus high magic, something like alchemy, or high ritual magic, that tends to be more lengthy. But a few examples that I can give here, because it depends what someone's interested in, and also, pragmatically speaking, for those that aren't, self-employed and can get up when they want and, spend hours doing rituals or something, or studying old tomes, you have a limited, maybe, amount of time on the average day. It may be impossible physically to practice certain kinds of magic. For instance, for the former, short kinds of magic. One of the shortest of all is sort of the Greek tradition. We're talking the pagan era, although I believe that it lasts long, long into modernity. Leland speaks of this with sort of the post-Roman period in the Etruscan region within Italy, the witchcraft tradition there, which is not 100% totally sourced properly, but it's a pretty good primer nonetheless. What they had was a very simple practice. You could make an amulet, and you would have your spell. The top line is long, and then it gets shorter and shorter, and it forms sort of a text triangle, or vice versa. It starts off short. It can be in different arrangements. This is common as well if you look at some writing, in herbals especially. Geometric forms being composed of writing, sometimes for a sort of a geomantic purpose of sorts, if you think about it that way. Now, these low magic sort of invocations were simple. We would think of maybe even like the emperor cult of Rome, very prescribed ritualism, very simplistic. As long as you had a little bit of money for the proper incense on the right day, you could then go to the temple and you could make your offering. You could evoke some religious mystic significance from that. It didn't require any great thought. It was prescribed to you, very explicit. It's basically buy this kind of incense, offer it on this kind of day, do this little invocation, you're done. It took like 5 minutes probably. And there was a reason for that, of course. To the cosmopolitan urban Roman, you had stuff to do, you have money to make, you have to go bake more bricks or make more pottery, or you have to go make sure that the shitty building that you're renting out to people is still structurally sound enough to be up to code, which is basically a standing structure of some sort people are paying you to live in at the time. It was very simplistic. You get this often within urban situations, I've noticed. Rural, and I've made a separate video on rural versus urban occultism. Urban occultism tends to be more quick. It tends to be more materialistic as well, whereas the rural side, it can be more lengthy. I mean, the concept, when you're talking about certain paths, like think of the Solomonic cycle, some of the rituals there. You have to withdraw to a very quiet place, potentially out in nature, a grove, a cave or something, or an inner room with no windows or something. Many urbanites are going to lack the capability of actually having enough alone time to conduct that kind of ritualism. Someone who lives here, in a rural area, it's easy for me. I can go out in the woods and I can do this sort of stuff if I was inclined to do so. An urbanite might find that they have to drive 10 miles in order to find the nearest location they can ably conduct their rituals in. That's going to be difficult, especially when the urbanite rushing around 9 to 5 is also spending an hour a day commuting to and from work. It's going to be difficult. That sort of lifestyle is not, I think, compatible with many kinds of ritualism. Now, I'm gonna put myself out there and say that I think that people who live in, chaotic urban situations miss something in their spiritual development oftentimes. I think that might have a wider social and political impacts as well. We would think of alchemy. Alchemy is exceptionally lengthy. Now, it doesn't have to be in the spiritual sense. The spiritual essence of alchemy can be quite simple. That is, literally, it's nothing more than a form of perfecting oneself through prayer and ritual, your behavior literally being chaste, or, praise Jesus, basically. The physical side, insofar as it's counterfeiting, would take quite some time. You'd also have to have a basic understanding of metallurgy, in the sense of creating medicine, so-called by alchemists, or these various elixirs, various compounds. That would take a while. It's literally chemistry. It would also take a setup that would be quite expensive. You would need to have a room in your homes dedicated solely to the purpose at hand. You'd probably also want a very, very good hazmat suit, considering some of the things that they worked with. Again, A rural individual might be able to create the philosopher's furnace and begin making elixir. A person living in a high-rise probably is not going to find themselves capable of doing so without getting a visit from the police. Oh, what are you manufacturing in here? Oh, it's not methamphetamine, officer. Don't worry. I'm trying to make the sorcerer's stone. Okay, you can keep yourself. I don't think it's going to work that way. You would think of Kabbalah. Kabbalah. And I've actually just completed editing a work by Abelson on Jewish mysticism. Kabbalah is probably the most difficult, convoluted, and confusing mystic path you can think of. Above all others, alchemy is nothing compared to some of the Jewish mysticism, where every sound and every word has its own mystic meaning that you have to interpret, and it's a metaphor for how to live your life, and says something about the Torah, and this part of the Torah says something about some other thing within the mystic world, and some extra canonical text here. This reference explains this one verse in the Torah. It's very, very strange actually going through it. It also tends to be legalistic. It doesn't have to be. In certain mystic traditions, if it's more individualized. However, it's going to tend to be because, of course, the rabbinical scholars, those that are respected, they're considered very holy, very trained and stuff. I spent 50 years just reading this one page of the Torah because, I wanted to fully understand the meaning of God. Essentially, you have that very legalistic system. There's going to be a lot of notation on the meaning of those various words, and this is literally rooted in Hebraic tradition. It's literally rooted to the concept of creation itself. It's created out of certain things, and it has to do with communication. It's also a very linguistic system. In some systems, you don't get that. In a lot of cases with New Age magic, and I've noticed this, linguistically speaking, the basic goal is to be theatrical and to make it sound like Old English. Like they'll start using thee and thou for no reason. That doesn't really have any wider meaning. Some of the texts that inform the concept of Old English being the language of occultism come from Latin anyway and were translated maybe in the 1700s. So really, you should really be learning Latin if you want to go down the purist path. I've encountered people that language-wise are very, very puristic. I tend not to be. I tend to modernize most of the language in editions that I make, like within my literary scope. I modernize what I can. Sometimes you can't. If it's in the form of an invocation, it stays the same. If it's a secondary reference from another text, it stays the same. If it's easily understood and it adds to the flow so that it's actually more authentic in some way that I can't otherwise edit, it remains the same. Otherwise, I de-archaize the language, make it proper for a modern audience. It's one thing that people don't understand about my editing work. I've had people make the claim, he just takes out of copyright stuff and sells it. No, it's much more complex than that. I've made a blog post dealing with this on my literary blog, which, by the way, I think I didn't move over to WordPress. I think it failed to transfer. A couple posts did. I should probably take a look at that. But it's trust me, more complex than that. You're going to have a vocabulary that extends beyond the actual English language in order to edit some of these works. So some of these people, they should try it themselves, see what happens. But yeah, complexity and difficulty matters. If you're one of those people who's like, I want to practice magic, but I've got like 10 minutes a day to do that, maybe you're better off getting a yoga mat, in all honesty. To tell the truth, maybe you're better off sticking to something that's not entirely authentic. Do the hedge Wicca thing. Have a little planter, a couple grow lamps, grow some herbs, read a Wiccan book, a chapter, and it'll make you feel good. Maybe you find that spiritually fulfilling. And you are godlike whenever you're growing anything. The scope of that entire life form's life is essentially controlled totally by you from seed or cutting or whatever all the way up through its death. You can kill it at any time, toss it out the fucking window. It's actually a very godlike activity. You'll find that most gardeners are quite benevolent in their treatment of everything other than the dregs of society, aka dandelions, except in spring when you're eating the greens, the crabgrass. I don't know. Crabgrass is better than regular turf grass. I think it's softer and looks better. I like the light green color. What can I say? I like a scraggly lawn. It's a little bit more biodiverse, oddly enough. With all the weeds growing in it, it's a better habitat than a monoculture, and I'm not going to spray with chemicals near my food. But yes, if you've got more time on your hands, let's say you're retired, you're under 18 or you're in college, you're self-employed, you work part-time or something, yeah, you can get into some of the higher magical rituals, absolutely. Otherwise, or you're a housewife or something, or you stay-at-home dad, you drink Soylent all day. That's what you can do, absolutely. But you don't want to get into some of these rituals. Some of them require weeks or months of preparations. Like, for 2 lunar cycles, you must ritualistically bathe 3 times a day at this time, that time, and this time. And also pray this prayer at 6 o'clock. And also, no, you can't have sex, and you can't eat anything except after the hours of 8 o'clock to 10. Or, you get into these weird rituals sometimes to purge yourself, to become spiritually more aware, enter a trance, whatever it happens to be. It's going to take a lot of time. It's also going to take self-control and effort. And if you don't have self-control, don't even bother becoming an occultist. Don't even bother, because you're going to fail. You're not going to understand anything that you're reading. So there's a little bit of the difference between them. There's a difference between a simplistic 4 or 5 line invocation that you just sort of fling a hex at somebody, in the maybe not quite authentic Wiccan tradition, some of the so-called covens. You get this in other communities, largely online, versus maybe a more, I hate to use the term, but authentic magical system. That's about all. Peace out.